Shabbat Shalom. This is Shabbat Behar. Our parashah, Behar, is Hebrew for on the mountain, which of course reminds us of where Moshe is and exactly what is happening. Moshe is with Hashem on Sinai. He is receiving the mishpatim and instructions by which the nation and people of Israel must in the future conduct their lives. God's plan for our people encompassed every area of life, including many issues which might seem, especially to modern people, to be completely outside the purview of what we consider to be faith. But this is not about ceremonies. This is about lifestyle. God instructs Moshe to explain to the Bnei Israel the details of Shmita and Yovel, the sabbatical and Jubilee years. Jubilee is from the Hebrew Yovel, which means shofar or trumpet. Every 50th year in Israel was to be announced as a Yovel or a Jubilee year by the sounding of the shofar. Every 7th year was to be a sabbatical year for the land, during which no fields would be sown and no vineyards planted. In the 7th year, everyone in the land, including slaves, resident aliens, and animals of the field, would be sustained by natural abundance. After a cycle of 7 times 7, every 50th year would be a Jubilee year, during which everyone returned to his or her ancestral land. And that meant that the land was literally returned to its original owner. This law applied to lands and houses outside of walled cities, and also to houses owned by the Leviim in walled cities or not. As in the case of the price of indentured servants, the law made provision for the price of real property to vary according to the proximity of the sale to the year of Jubilee. God took everything into account. And the Jubilee year was to be a year of rest for the land and, incidentally, for the farmers. The land was to remain fallow, even though it had been so the previous sabbatical year. We were to live simply on what the fields had produced in the 6th year and whatever grew spontaneously. Living in this way required real faith in Hashem. Whether or not these practices were actually followed is a matter of some debate. Some scholars, including Rabbi Arthur Vasco and representatives of the American Journal of Economics and Sociology, remarkably say that they were followed, at least some of the time. Others argue that an entire year and periodically 2 years, the 49th and 50th year, without planting would reduce the Bnei Israel to starvation, making them easy targets for the Canaanites and others. But of course, that depends on whether you believe that God provides. It is unlikely that our people properly observe the Jubilee consistently, considering Yirmiyahu's description of unbelief and failure and disobedience, although God clearly promises restoration and a return to our land. Yirmiyahu tells us that Israel went into exile for our failure to keep this commandment, the commandment of the sabbatical year and the year of Jubilee, among other commandments we failed to keep. The exile was calculated as 70 years, 1 year each, for 70 sabbatical years in which the land had not been allowed to lie fallow. This was a total of 490 years, including nearly 10 Jubilee years. This teaching was only meant to apply to the land of Israel and was never applied or meant to be applied in exile. The more religious of our people suggest that Shmita and Yovel should be reinstated in the modern state of Israel. And some farmers, those who are religious, have put this command into practice. Others argue that these commands can only be applied when the majority of the world's Jews live in Israel. The very religious teach that all the commands, including these, will be followed when Mashiach comes or in the Messianic age, but not now. What does this mean to us? The question that seems to fascinate many Jews is not historical, but actually theological. Why did God give us these specific commands concerning the land? What does this tell us about God's view of land, labor, and liberty, as he speaks so directly to Moshe about the importance of the sabbatical and Jubilee years? How can we draw closer to God and his purpose through this week's Torah portion? As I read Parashat Behar, I see that Hashem directs that labor should be balanced with rest, in the same way that our work week attains balance only when we keep Shabbat and really keep it holy. God commands us to balance the earth's 7 years of production with a year to lie fallow, to rest. Rotating cycles of crops with cycles of rest, or planting something like winter wheat, then plowing it back into the earth, enables land to stay fertile, to remain a source of abundance. This is not merely common sense, it is holy obligation. God is concerned that we should understand that the land we sell, the land of Israel, in some fundamental sense, cannot be transferred, including land that we have given away, supposedly for peace, like Gaza. We may lease our holdings to another for a year or a lifetime or even longer, but ultimately all lands return to the original owner, the God who created it and gave it to us. It is his land and his people, Israel. God seeks for us to recognize and understand that even servitude of whatever sort is a temporary condition. No matter what dire straits we may get ourselves into through errors in judgment or even financial necessity, once in every lifetime, the slate was to be wiped clean, enabling a fresh start. Think for a moment about the millions of Brits, Americans, Israelis, shackled by credit card debt, and imagine the feeling of complete liberation if these debts were wiped away every 50th year. It is impossible to imagine major banks and other creditors making such a decision, but this only serves to highlight the difficulty of carrying out the practical commandments in this week's Torah portion. Could we leave all farms unworked every 7th year? The prudent man or woman of this world would say this is unreasonable and maybe even unethical, considering that the world is plagued by hunger. Certainly, such an action would require complete trust in God's provision, which I believe was part of the original equation. But we learned something about the importance of treating our land, not only the land of Israel, but all land, with the same care we seek to show ourselves. Seeking to return property to its rightful owner would probably have disastrous effects on the global economy. But maybe we can begin to see that our property is borrowed, not only from our children who will inherit it, but more significantly from Hashem, who created it and who continues to sustain it despite everything we have done to destroy it. Proclaim liberty throughout the land for all its inhabitants. This verse is inscribed on the Liberty Bell, which sits near the place where the Declaration of Independence was signed in Philadelphia, USA. The writings of America's founding fathers are filled with images from the Hebrew Scriptures, not because these men were believers in any sense of the word. Most of them were deists or theists, but because the Scriptures resonated with their perspective on liberty. The founders spoke so often in Torah terms, perhaps seeing themselves as inheritors of the Israelite tradition, fleeing from the Mitzrayim of Britain to establish a new nation by the work of their hands. I think the decision to inscribe a line from Behar on the Liberty Bell is relevant. The sound of a bell, like the sound of the shofar, is intended to awaken those who hear it. We read more about the Jubilee year. Every 50th year on Yom Kippur, let the shofarot blow loud and long throughout the land, for the 50th year shall be a holy time to proclaim liberty throughout all the land to all enslaved debtors, a time for the canceling of all public and private debts. It shall be a year when all the family estates sold to others shall be returned to the original owners or their heirs. What a happy year it will be. In it you will not sow, nor gather crops nor grapes. It is a holy year of Jubilee for you. According to Torah, the Jubilee was observed only when all the tribes of Israel were living in the land. And you shall sanctify the 50th year and proclaim freedom throughout the land for all who live on it. The implication is clear. Jubilee is only sanctified when we are all together, living in the land of Israel. Jubilee was only observed when every tribe lived in the designated area given by God, although some believe that Jubilee should be observed as long as there was even a partial representation of each tribe in the land. In the 6th century BCE, the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel and sent the majority of its population into exile. With the destruction of the temple and the exile of the kingdom of Yehuda, which Yirmiyahu and others prophesied, observance of Jubilee ceased. When the Sanhedrin was disbanded, we ceased to even mark the Jubilee year in any way. The requirement to observe Jubilee would have ended about 150 years before the destruction of the first temple. Today, the Jubilee year is neither designated nor generally observed. But if we look at Yirmiyahu and Yochanan from our readings this morning, we see another aspect. Yirmiyahu was in prison with the sound of the enemy, the Babylonians, just outside the city walls. His cousin came and offered him the family right of redemption to purchase a piece of property which was already in Babylonian control. Anatot was then an important city with suburbs and fields about 3 miles northeast of Jerusalem. When the land was being settled under Yehoshua, it was designated as the property of the Leviim and a city of refuge for any person accused of homicide. Nearby are stone quarries that still supply stones to Jerusalem for building repairs. Olive and fig trees and fields of grain still produce harvests, a legacy of the Leviim who first settled here. Well, we can guess at this man's motives. He wanted to cash out of a hopeless situation. Why would Yirmiyahu buy land or receive land that was already controlled by the enemy, when he especially knew that the enemy was going to win? But God told Yirmiyahu to purchase the land. It was an acknowledgement that God would keep his promise of accomplishing Israel's restoration. Yirmiyahu obeyed, despite the fact that the whole of his prophetic ministry had been warning his people that God was going to discipline Israel through the Babylonians and exile. Exile. After the transaction was completed, Yirmiyahu prayed, and Hashem granted him the answer he needed. His prayer teaches us about real faith in a bleak, confusing situation. Most of us can relate to confusing, seemingly hopeless situations, as we've all been in them at one time or another. If you're not there at the moment, you undoubtedly have been and very likely will be again. Perhaps you face a financial crisis and wonder where the money is going to come from. Maybe you have an impossible family situation, one in which you see no hope and you have no idea what to do, or an overwhelming health problem that seems beyond your ability to cope. There may be a pressing decision you must make where it seems that none of the options are good. Most importantly, What we see with Yirmiyahu is the ability to look beyond the present to a future that God is preparing as we learn to trust God. Yirmiyahu was to exemplify God's purpose to bring about deliverance and justice for his people. And he will also bring about renewal, as we read in Yeshayahu 61 and elsewhere. Ancient ruins and places long devastated would be rebuilt. Some of this, of course, has already taken place since 1948. Israel will be fully restored as the priestly nation, a nation of Kohanim, and will be supported by the wealth of the Goyim. Instead of shame, Israel will receive a double portion by firstborn entitlement. Disgrace will be replaced with joy in our restored inheritance. Aliens, foreigners, will serve Israel. This is a mark of prosperity, in that Israel will be able to have others serve them. And the special relationship between God and Israel, establishing God as Abba, Father, and Israel as his firstborn son, will be restored. God promises a renewed covenant with Israel. In my faithfulness, I will reward them and make an everlasting covenant with them. Their descendants will be known among the nations, and their offspring among the peoples. All who see them will acknowledge that they are a people that the Lord has blessed. And listen to these wonderful words of encouragement and assurance for our people. I delight greatly in the Lord. My soul rejoices in my God, for he has clothed me with garments of salvation and arrayed me in a robe of righteousness, as a bridegroom adorns his head like a Cohen, and as a bride adorns herself with her jewels. For as the soil makes the sprout come up, and a garden causes seeds to grow, so the sovereign Lord will make righteousness and praise spring up before all nations. And thus we see that Yovel, Jubilee, was not merely an agricultural event that took place every 50 years. It was founded upon the principle of Shabbat, and the people of Israel sanctified unto God. It anticipates the restoration of all things, when the Yovel of God will sound to announce the return of Mashiach. As the redeemed of Mashiach, the remnant of faith, God has appointed us to represent him among our people and to the world as his ambassadors, his shaliachim to our people and to the world around us. We are a light. We have been chosen to become bearers of the Besarah, the good news of God. But we are also responsible to comfort our people, to speak tenderly. Our people have suffered wherever they have lived. We have been persecuted and reviled, and we continue to be the subject of growing and abnormal hatred throughout the world. The majority of our people are also estranged from God. Rav Shaul himself of the Parashim declared that our people have, in many cases, a zeal for God, but not according to the knowledge that comes only from him. Sadly, most of our people know nothing of the love of God or of the plan of God for the present or for the future. And God has appointed us to bring comfort to those of our people in spiritual despair who have no one to share God's love with them. We must see ourselves as a bridge for reconciliation between God and our people, to bind up wounds and offer hope. Mashiach has promised that if you obey what I say, then you are really my Talmudim. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Consider the state of our people today and their spiritual needs. Show us survivors, those who remain, their children, their grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Mothers and fathers who have lost sons and daughters to the wars and terrorist attacks brought about by hatred and unprovoked jealousy, and those whose family members are still hostages in Gaza. Many who live below the poverty line in Israel, having come expecting Gan Eden, find life one long struggle. We think also of those addicted to drugs and alcohol, suffering from deep depression because life has been so difficult for them, and of the many who believe everything is okay, but who have the deepest hurt of all, having no relationship with the God who created them and wants to have a relationship with them. God speaks restoration and desires to give to all of our people beauty for ashes, joy instead of mourning, praise instead of heaviness of heart. Comfort, oh, comfort my people, says your God. Speak kindly to Jerusalem and call out to her that her warfare is ended, that her iniquity has been removed, that she has received of the Lord's hand double for all her sin. We eagerly await the day when God will bring our entire nation back home, including those who have been lost through assimilation. Then we will celebrate the Jubilee year, as well as so many other mitzvot, which we are incapable of performing at this time. Yes, we have seen the beginning of the restoration of our people. God has planted us in our own land like strong and graceful oaks for his own glory. And he has begun to restore our people, and his ultimate intention is Israel's renewal, revival, and reconciliation to himself. Whereas you have been forsaken and hated with no one passing through, I will make you an everlasting majesty, a joy from generation to generation. Then all your people will be righteous. They will possess the land forever, the branch of my planting, the work of my hands, that I may be glorified. If their stumbling is bringing riches to the world, that is, if Israel's being placed temporarily in a condition less favored than that of the Goyim is bringing riches to the latter, how much greater riches will Israel in its fullness bring them? When Mashiach returns, God will be glorified by all, as is his right as creator and ruler of the universe. We can be participants with God in his eternal plan for Israel and for humankind, which will soon be brought to fruition. We can enjoy Jubilee as God intended it, reigning with Mashiach from Jerusalem with full fruition of the Jubilee plan, when everything will be renewed and revived, including us. Finally, we read in Yeshayahu 62, "For Zion's sake I will not hold my peace, and for Jerusalem's sake I will not rest, until the righteousness thereof go forth as brightness, and the salvation thereof as a lamp that burns. I have set watchmen upon your walls, O Jerusalem, which shall never hold their peace day nor night. You that make mention of the Lord, do not keep silent. Give him no rest until he establishes and makes Jerusalem a praise in all the earth." Shabbat Shalom.